World leaders are drawing up a pact aimed at preventing another pandemic. The second day of the G7 summit in the United Kingdom will also focus on climate change. And the gathering of the biggest global economies will see a push for more Western cohesion against challenges from Russia and China.
It's the first time these global leaders have got together in person since the start of the pandemic. With the spotlight on a green recovery, Britain's Queen Elizabeth was the star of a gala dinner at a futuristic botanical garden.
Are you supposed to be looking as if you're enjoying it?
Yes, definitely.
Hosting the proceedings, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
I think that is what the people of our countries now want us to focus on. They want us to be sure that we're beating the pandemic together and discussing how we'll never have a repeat of what we've seen, but also that we're building back better together and building back greener and building back fairer and building back more equal.
G7 leaders agree a joint approach is the only way to end the pandemic and tackle the climate crisis. We need everyone across the world to want to work together, especially on the issue of climate protection and biodiversity, where we will never find solutions without China. Hundreds of climate change protesters marched to bring their message as near to the summit venue as they could get.
So we've got a situation post-COVID with developing countries drowning in debt as a result of COVID, failing to get vaccines and failing to get the climate finance they need to help them mitigate their emissions and adapt to the climate crisis. So it's a situation of staggering inequity, and we feel that this needs to be brought to the attention of the G7 leaders.
As day one of the summit drew to a close, activists staged a vigil to remember the estimated 3.7 million people who've died in the pandemic. They'll be looking for more definite measures to emerge before the gathering wraps up.
DW correspondent Alexander Van Namen is in Carbis Bay, Cornwall, where the G7 is taking place this weekend. Alexandra, what specific proposals are percolating there to tackle climate change, which, of course, many see as the single greatest long-term challenge facing the world today?
Yes, this is definitely very high on the agenda. Here, the G7 leaders are going to discuss climate change tomorrow. There are two key questions, I would say. First of all, of course, what measures have to be implemented to reach the goal of zero emissions by 2050? And the other question is whether the G7 will live up to their promise to provide more financial support to developing countries to help them adapt to climate change consequences and switch to green energy. The US administration is promising here tangible climate action, but it is actually the European Union that is leading the way. They have decided to spend their COVID recovery funds mostly on green energy and on green economy, and they're hoping that the rest of the G7 will follow.
No doubt you are aware UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has made a dramatic appeal to the G7 nations to do more to tackle climate change. Let's listen into what he had to say about this.
We are in a situation in the world where the average temperature rise in relation to pre-industrial levels is already 1.2 degrees. Very close to the 1.5 degrees that the international scientific community tells us is the limit to avoid the catastrophic developments in the world. So to a certain extent, we are on the verge of the abyss. And when we are on the verge of the abyss, we need to make sure that the next step is on the right direction.
Cautionary words, to say the least, Alexandra. Are the Secretary General's words likely to move leaders towards a stronger position?
Well, he will be here to participate in the discussion, so we can expect him to reiterate his message. Will the leaders listen? They should, experts say. According to latest studies, they are at risk at losing 8 8% of their GDP each year when they are not going to tackle climate change.
The other big issue on the agenda this weekend is tackling the pandemic, of course. Are leaders united on that?
Well, so far they seem to be united. They have pledged to donate at least 1 billion vaccine doses to low and middle income countries to vaccinate the world until 2022. That is not enough, but of course progress when we consider that many rich countries were accused of hoarding vaccines only a few months ago. The leaders have also agreed to establish a global pandemic radar to identify new COVID-19 variants. But there is one controversial issue on the table, the question whether it makes sense to lift intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines. And we have here the US supporting this proposal, France saying that they are ready to talk, but Germany is still pretty much against that.
That's Alexandra von Namen at the G20 summit in England. As always, many thanks, Alexandra. A short time ago, I talked to Alexander Graf Lambsdorff, a German lawmaker and former vice president of the European Parliament. I asked him to respond to criticism that the G7's plans to share at least 1 billion shots with developing countries has come too late.
The European Union has made a great effort to step up to its obligation early on. Then there was the global program called COVAX. It's a reality that the United States and the United Kingdom have not exported vaccines. So if the US and the UK now join the EU in looking out for the countries of the global south, I think that's a very good development.
Okay. Well, demonstrative unity, warm words, a relaxed atmosphere generally. Is the collegiality we're seeing simply the hope of a post-Trump era, or is it a reflection of real substantive policy agreements?
Well, both. I mean, Michael, we've probably also seen these images from the G7 meetings where Donald Trump was in attendance. To everybody's irritation, it was a, how should I say, a very unusual way of handling the summit meetings by the then US president. Joe Biden is somebody everybody knows. The United States are back in a stronger position. The economic recovery is strong. Their vaccine campaign has gone well. And Joe Biden is, well, first of all, he's a man you can deal with, a man of his word. And it's somebody who will listen to his allies around the table. As you can see, by the way, from the choreography of the coming days, it's now G7, it's going to be NATO, then EU, and only then is he going to meet the Russian President Putin. So the Western world has come together at this G7 meeting, and I think that's a very good signal.
You mentioned President Putin, so let's focus on Russia for a moment. Trump wanted to bring President Putin back to the G7 table. Biden comes with the promise of calling Putin out instead of cozying up to him. What do you think the G7's message to Russia should be?
Well, first of all, that there is a united view of Russia's policies concerning Ukraine. There's the illegal annexation of Crimea. There is the civil war supported by Russia, fomented by Russia in eastern Ukraine, a country that Russia promised to protect. When Ukraine gave back its nuclear weapons in 1994, Russia promised to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. By and large, Russia's policies are aggressive and unfriendly. And I think to have the Western meetings, as I said, G7, NATO and EU, before the US-Russian summit, I think the signal is very strong that the Americans are now looking for Western unity, and I think they'll be able to come up with it as well.
Well, the list of problem solving is long. Economic recovery after the pandemic, unified action, a plan to protect the world's lands and oceans to fight climate change. But as Chancellor Merkel mentioned, China isn't even there. How substantial can the results be without a central world player like China?
Well, of course, the G7 cannot save the world. The G7 was, originally started out as an informal gathering around a fireplace of Western leaders to talk without media present, without diplomats, without advisors, as a very small informal setting. It has turned into a sort of, a meeting that everybody takes an interest in, but it has never, claimed to solve the world's problems. The United Nations are for that. The G20 is for that. But it's not the place where the world's problems are solved. It's the place where Western liberal democracies gather to compare notes and to agree on certain steps. And then in the next step, you talk to countries outside of the G7 to bring them on board or to listen to their ideas, demands, and hammer out compromises with them and try to find solutions with them.
German lawmaker Alexander Graf Lambsdorff, really do appreciate your time and your perspective.
Thank you.